He was the world's most famous polyglot, a man who built an empire on his genius ability to speak 30 languages. She was a waitress, invisible, refilling his water glass. When he arrogantly asked her to translate a rare document just to mock her, he expected silence. He expected her to be humiliated. But he made one critical mistake. He never bothered to ask her name. He was about to find out that the waitress he dismissed wasn't just a genius. She was the one person on earth who held the secret to his complete and total ruin. The scriptorium wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Tucked away on a cobblestone side street in New York's West Village, it prided itself on an atmosphere of intellectual superiority. The walls were lined with first-edition books, locked behind glass cases. The lighting was perpetually dim, as if to encourage hushed, important conversations. Even the menu was pretentious, written in a cursive font, so flowery it was nearly illegible, with dishes named after obscure poets. The clientele matched: critics, tenured professors, trust fund artists, and media personalities who wanted to be seen reading hardcover books. And then there was Nina. To the patrons of the scriptorium, Nina Russo was just part of the expensive scenery. She was the 29-year-old waitress with the quiet eyes and the impossibly neat bun, the one who refilled water glasses without a sound and memorized orders for a table of 8 without writing anything down. Her movements were economical, precise. She never intruded, never made small talk. She was, in the eyes of the elite she served, a perfect, invisible automaton. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, a man with a weak chin and an obsessive devotion to the restaurant's brand, considered her a model employee. She's quiet, she's efficient, she never complains, he'd tell the others. But beneath that starched white apron and quiet efficiency, Dr. Nina Russo was suffocating. 5 years ago, she had been the most promising historical linguist of her generation. Her doctoral thesis on phonetic memory in exile communities was set to revolutionize the field. She could not only read 20 languages, but understand their bones, their structure, their soul. She could hear the ghost of Latin in a modern Romanian curse word, trace the path of Viking invaders through the syntax of a Scottish fisherman. But that life was gone. It had been stolen from her, burned to the ground by betrayal, leaving her with nothing but a mountain of student debt and a profound, bone-deep silence. So she served $30 appetizers to people who misquoted Foucault, and she listened. She listened to them mangle French, deploy laughably bad BBC English accents, and debate topics they'd clearly just learned about from a podcast. She was clearing plates, a seared scallop barely touched, when the restaurant's atmosphere shifted. The hushed intellectual hum spiked with a new, excited energy. Mr. Henderson was practically vibrating at the host stand, his hands fluttering. Professor Alistair Croft had arrived. Nina felt her stomach clench. She didn't need to see him. His voice, a booming theatrical baritone designed for lecture halls and television studios, preceded him. "My dear Henderson, you've kept the place marvelously sepulchral. I adore it." Alistair Croft was not just a professor, he was a phenomenon. The people's polyglot. He had a prime-time TV special where he'd travel to a new country and be fluent in the local language by the end of the week. He had best-selling books with titles like The Word Weaver and Babel Unlocked. He was handsome in a way that academics rarely are, with a silver-flecked mane of hair, a tailored tweed jacket, and a smile that was both charming and deeply condescending. Nina knew exactly who he was, and she knew, with the certainty of a true expert, that he was a complete and utter fraud. She had watched his documentary on the Silk Road. She'd seen him translate a Uyghur poem, and she'd cringed. He hadn't translated it. He'd paraphrased the English subtitles, missing all the complex Turkic verb moods. He was a linguistic tourist, a man who collected simple phrases the way a child collects shiny rocks, presenting them as treasure. He wasn't a genius. He was just a man with a fantastic memory and zero shame. "Right this way, Professor," Henderson gushed. "Your usual table." Of course, it was in her section. Nina kept her head down, her tray balanced perfectly. She could feel the magnetic pull of his ego from 3 tables away. He was holding court for a table of 3, 2 fawning journalists from a glossy magazine and a younger, ambitious-looking academic. "And the beauty of Mandarin, you see," Croft was booming, "is its tonal purity, its music. I told the premier in Beijing, in his own dialect, of course, that to speak it is to sing." The journalist scribbled this down. Nina resisted the urge to roll her eyes. His own dialect. Beijing has one standard dialect. This man is a cartoon. She approached the table. "Good evening. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Croft didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand, mid-anecdote. "The usual. A bottle of the Sancerre and water for the table. Still, not sparkling." For the next hour, she was a ghost in their orbit. She poured wine, delivered bread, and listened to Alistair Croft perform. He flattered the journalists, quoting their own articles back to them. He casually corrected the young academic's pronunciation of Goethe. He was charming, brilliant, and utterly exhausting. And with every booming laugh, Nina felt the ghost of her old life scratching at the inside of her ribs. The injustice of it all, that this performer was celebrated, while she, who had done the work, was serving him wine. The main courses were cleared. The journalists were hanging on his every word. The moment had come. This, Nina knew, was the real reason for the dinner. It was time for the grand finale. "Now," Croft said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. The table leaned in with him. "For the little treat I promised." He reached into his expensive leather satchel and, with the flair of a magician, produced an object. It wasn't a book. It was a journal, ancient and water-stained. The leather was warped and stiff, the pages yellowed and brittle, smelling of salt and thyme. "This," he said, placing it on the table, "is special." The young academic gasped. Is that what I think it is?" "Indeed, Dr. Peterson." Croft smiled, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "A 19th-century sailor's log. I acquired it at a private auction in Marseille. But the logbook itself isn't the treasure. It's the letters tucked inside." He carefully opened the journal to a back pocket, from which he extracted a small, folded piece of parchment. It was covered in a dense, spidery script, the ink faded from brown to a faint rust. "Genoese Ligurian," Croft announced. "An archaic dialect. Not quite Italian, not quite French. Almost completely oral, famously difficult to transcribe. A linguistic dead end, for most." He chuckled. "Even my publisher's best translators were baffled." He put on a pair of small, silver-rimmed reading glasses, positioning the letter under the table's tiny lamp. He was in full performance mode. "Let's see," he murmured, tracing the lines with a manicured finger. "Ah, yes. The sea. The sea is cold, and I feel the hunger. Simple. A sailor's complaint." He squinted, his brow furrowing. He was clearly struggling, but he'd never admit it. He was hitting the words that were close to modern Italian and bluffing his way through the rest. "It's dense," he said, trying to cover his hesitation. "The syntax is primitive. It's about the difficulty of the voyage, the longing for home. Standard maritime fare." Nina was standing just behind his left shoulder, holding a silver pitcher of ice water. She hadn't meant to look. It was a breach of her professional invisibility, but she had seen the script, and her heart had stopped. Croft, sensing her presence, looked up. His eyes, magnified by the glasses, were sharp and cold. He saw her glance at the letter. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. This was perfect. A prop. A way to demonstrate his intellectual gulf from the common rabble. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness. The table turned to look at her. Nina froze, caught in the spotlight. "What is it, my dear? Are you a student of languages?" "Nina," Mr. Henderson hissed from across the room, motioning for her to move along. But Croft held up a hand. No, it's fine. Indulge me." He turned his full 100-watt charm on her. "You look like you might have some Italian in you. What's your name?" "Nina," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nina. Lovely. Parli Italiano, Nina." "A little," she managed. "A little." He chuckled, sharing the joke with his table. "I love that. Well, this is a bit more complex than a little Italian." He slid the priceless, brittle parchment across the tablecloth toward her, a gesture of profound arrogance. "Go on," Professor Alistair Croft said, his eyes glittering with mockery. "Give it a try. Tell us what this old sailor is complaining about." The three guests at the table stared, their expressions ranging from pity to bemused contempt. The young academic, Dr. Peterson, looked down at his lap, clearly embarrassed by his mentor's cruelty. The journalists, however, sensed a moment. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, watched Nina's face, her journalistic instincts humming. Mr. Henderson, still hovering by the host stand, looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. Nina didn't move. She simply stared at the letter. The world around her dissolved. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of the other tables, the oppressive scent of old books and veal stock, it all vanished. There was only the script. It wasn't Genoese Ligurian. That was a broad, academic term. This was more specific. This was the dialect of Sestri Ponente, a waterfront neighborhood in Genoa. She knew the cross of the T. She knew the specific, looping flourish of the G. She knew the way the writer skipped the vowels, a common shorthand for those who spoke it every day. She knew it because it was the exact script her nonna, her grandmother, had used to write down recipes, to scribble notes, to write the long, aching letters to her cousins back home. This wasn't an academic puzzle to Nina. This was the voice of her childhood. This was the language she had been rocked to sleep in, the language she had been scolded in, the language she had used to say, "I love you," to the woman who raised her. Professor Croft was still smiling. "Cat got your tongue, my dear. It's quite all right. It's baffled the best." Nina felt a sudden, cold calm settle over her. The years of suppressed rage, of humiliation, of grief for her stolen life, coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. She reached out, not with her hand, but with her mind. She didn't touch the parchment. She simply read. Her voice, when it came, was not the whisper of a waitress. It was clear, measured, and academic. It was the voice of Dr. Nina Russo. "He's not a sailor," she said. The table froze. Croft's smile twitched at the corners. I beg your pardon?" Nina's eyes scanned the page, her mind moving at a speed that Croft, with his tourist's vocabulary, could never comprehend. She wasn't just reading the words. She was hearing them. She heard the cadence, the emotion, the unwritten cultural context. "He's not a sailor," she repeated, her gaze lifting to meet Croft's. "He's a poet, and this isn't a logbook. It's a love letter." Sarah Jenkins, the journalist, put her wine glass down. "That's preposterous," Croft snapped, his charm evaporating, replaced by a flush of irritation. The provenance is clear. It's a maritime journal. The journal belonged to a sailor, yes, Nina said, pointing a single, steady finger at a line near the top. But this letter was tucked inside. This man, Lorenzo, he wasn't part of the crew. He was a passenger. He was dying. Dying, the young academic, Peterson whispered, leaning in. Yes, Nina said. You read this line. She indicated the one Croft had translated. O ma ole freddo. You translated it as, the sea is cold. You're translating word for word, like a machine. She looked at Croft. But O mao, in this dialect, in this context, isn't just the sea. It's the sea of fate. And Fredo doesn't just mean cold. It means indifferent. Empty. He's writing, the sea of our fate is indifferent to me. And this, she continued, her voice gaining strength, where you read sento a fam, I feel the hunger. You missed the idiom. Fam here means hollowness, a wasting away. He's not hungry for food. He's writing, I feel the hollowness inside me growing. Croft's face had gone pale. This wasn't a party trick. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was a clinical, brutal dissection. He's writing to his wife, Maria, Nina went on, her eyes scanning the letter, translating flawlessly, the beautiful, tragic Ligurian rolling off her tongue before she translated it into English. My dearest Maria, she read, her voice softening. The doctor in Marseille gave me the journal to write in, but I have only one letter left to write, and it is to you. I see the shores of France fading. The sea of our fate is indifferent to me, and I feel the hollowness inside me growing. They say the air in New York will cure me, but I know I will not see the harbor. Nina paused, her throat tightening. She saw her nonna's face. She pushed on. Do not let our son play by the docks. I know he loves the water, but I fear it now. Tell him his father looked for him in the stars above the mast. She pointed to another line. Here, Professor, you read this word, barchen, as boat. The little boat. It's a common mistake. But in Sestri slang, O barchen, literally the little boat, is a cradle. The cradle they rocked their son in. She took a breath and read the final, devastating passage. Last night, the moon was a silver hook in the black. I dreamt of our kitchen. I dreamt I saw you stirring the soup, and you turned and smiled. I will hold on to that smile. I will not be afraid. Do not let the barchen be empty for long. Give our son a brother. Give him the love I can no longer send. I am and always will be your Lorenzo. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. The clinking of cutlery from other tables seemed a sacrilege. The young academic had tears in his eyes. Sarah Jenkins was staring at Nina, her mouth slightly open. Alistair Croft was white-knuckled, his hands gripping the table. He looked violated. He looked, for the first time in his public life, small. Nina stepped back. The invisible waitress returned. He wasn't writing with sailor's ink, she said quietly. It's iron gall ink, probably bought from a stationer in Marseille. It's highly acidic. The way you are handling the page, you're damaging the fibers. You should have it de-acidified. She looked at Professor Croft. Her eyes were not angry. They were not triumphant. They were just empty. He's not complaining about the food, Professor, she said. He's saying goodbye. She picked up her silver water pitcher, turned and walked away. The entire table watched her go. Croft was beet red, a mask of pure, humiliated rage. Well, he sputtered, attempting a laugh that came out as a choke. It seems our waitress is a budding romantic. A very creative interpretation. But no one was listening. Sarah Jenkins was watching Nina's retreating back, a single thought blazing in her mind. Who in the hell was that? The kitchen at the scriptorium was a different world. Where the dining room was dim, hushed, and cold, the kitchen was a blazing, hot, stainless steel cavern of noise. Chefs barked orders in Spanish, dishes clattered, and the air was thick with the smell of garlic and steam. Nina burst through the double doors, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pitcher. She set it down with a crash, leaning against the metal prep counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Nina? What's wrong?" "One of the line cooks," Marco asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," she breathed, closing her eyes. What did I just do? What did I just do? She had broken her one rule. Be invisible. After 5 years of meticulous, painful silence, she had spoken. The doors swung open again. This time it wasn't a chef. It was Mr. Henderson, his face a pale, blotchy mask of panic. "Russo," he hissed. He never used their last names. "My office. Now." His office was a tiny, windowless closet filled with invoices and boxes of cheap wine. He didn't ask her to sit. "What in God's name did you think you were doing?" he whispered, his voice trembling with fury. "He asked me to translate. He's Professor Alistair Croft. He's a patron. He's not asking you anything. He's being polite. You are here to serve wine, clear plates, and be silent. You are not here to give a lecture." "He was wrong," Nina said, her voice quiet. "I don't care if he was translating it into Klingon," Henderson shrieked, his composure snapping. "He is Alistair Croft. His review in the Times is the only reason we're still in business. You do not correct the patrons. You do not embarrass the patrons. Do you have any idea the position you've put me in?" He's furious. He's demanding I fire you." Nina's stomach dropped. Of course. She had humiliated him, and a man like Croft could not tolerate humiliation. He would crush the source. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson. It won't happen again." "You're damned right it won't," he seethed. "I'm not firing you tonight, because I'm short-staffed for the weekend. But you are on your final warning, Russo. You are to go back out there. You are to apologize to the professor, and you are to beg him to accept your apology. Then you will work the rest of your shift without saying a single word, unless it's more water, sir. Do you understand me?" The thought of apologizing to that fraud, to the man who represented everything that had destroyed her, made her physically ill. But she saw her tiny, one-room apartment. She saw her mountain of bills. She saw the crushing reality of being jobless in New York. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." "Good. Now get out and fix your face. You look a fright." She stepped back into the kitchen, her body numb. Marco gave her a sympathetic look, but she just shook her head and pushed back out into the dining room. But as she approached Croft's table, she saw it was empty. The bill was paid, the guests gone. She had been saved the immediate humiliation of an apology, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Croft had left in a rage. She spent the rest of the night in a daze, a true automaton. She cleared tables, took orders, poured wine, but her mind was miles away, back in the hallowed, dusty halls of her university, back in the office of the man who had ruined her. At 2 a.m. her shift finally ended. She changed out of her uniform, the cheap polyester sticking to her skin. She walked out the back service entrance into the alley, the cold, damp November air hitting her like a slap. And she was not alone. A woman was standing under the single, flickering street lamp, smoking a cigarette. It was the journalist from Croft's table, Sarah Jenkins. "That was quite a performance," Sarah said, taking a long drag. Her voice was sharp, cynical, pure New York. I'm sorry, I have to. Nina tried to walk past, but Sarah blocked her path. I'm not with the magazine he thinks I'm with, Sarah said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her heel. I'm a features writer for The Atlantic. That dinner was a puff-piece assignment I was going to turn down. Until you showed up. I don't know what you're talking about, Nina said, pulling her coat tighter. Bullshit, Sarah said, not unkindly. I watched you. You didn't just read that letter, you channeled it. And Croft, he didn't just look wrong, he looked terrified. I've been a journalist for 15 years. I know the look of a man who just had his entire identity threatened. She stepped closer. You're not a waitress, or at least, you weren't always. I ran your name through a few university databases while he was paying the check. Nina Russo. Nothing. You're a ghost. Please, Nina whispered, her voice breaking. Just leave me alone. I can't, Sarah said, because my gut is screaming at me that this isn't a story about a smart waitress. This is a story about him, Alistair Croft, and you know something that he's desperate to keep hidden. I want to know what it is. Nina looked at the journalist's relentless, intelligent eyes. She saw a shark, but she also saw, for the first time in 5 years, a lifeline. There's a coffee shop, Nina said, her voice shaking. It's open all night. It's 2 blocks from here. You buy and I'll talk. The coffee shop was a fluorescent-lit box, smelling of burnt coffee and powdered donuts. It was a haven for insomniacs, cab drivers, and students pulling all-nighters. At 2:30 a.m., it was mostly empty. Sarah Jenkins slid a mug of black coffee and a dry-looking muffin across the Formica table to Nina. Okay, she said, opening a reporter's notebook. Talk. Who are you, Nina? Nina wrapped her cold hands around the hot mug. Where did she even begin? It wasn't a single story. It was a slow, systematic dismantling of a life. My name is Dr. Nina Russo, she began, the title feeling foreign and bitter on her tongue. Or, it was supposed to be. I was doctoral candidate in historical linguistics at King's College London. My specialty is language isolates and oral traditions, specifically Ligurian. Your grandmother's language, Sarah guessed. Nina nodded. My nonna raised me. She never spoke English, only the Sestri dialect. I grew up with it. To me, it was just home. When I got to college, I realized I was one of maybe a few dozen people left in the world who spoke it fluently and understood linguistic theory. So I made it my life's work. She took a sip of the scalding coffee. I spent 7 years on my thesis. I wasn't just working in archives. I was in Genoa, in the fishing villages, recording the old-timers. I was proving a theory. A new theory. What theory? That these dying languages aren't dying at all, Nina said, her eyes lighting up with a fire Sarah hadn't seen. They're just hiding. They go underground. They're preserved not in books, but in memory, in family idioms, in songs, in recipes. I called it phonetic memory. I proved that the syntax and vocabulary of a language can survive for generations, completely unchanged inside an oral-only family structure, even when the speakers are fluent in another, dominant language. It was groundbreaking. Okay, Sarah said, writing rapidly. So what happened? Why are you serving scallops to idiots? Nina's face darkened. Dr. Martin Wade. Martin Wade? The linguist? The Martin Wade? The last word? Sarah knew the name. Wade was almost as famous as Croft, but on the academic, highbrow side. He was the scholar's scholar. He was my mentor, Nina said, her voice cracking. My advisor. He was like a father to me. He championed my research. He told me it was Revolutionary. He helped me secure grants. I trusted him. I trusted him with everything. My notes, my drafts, my audio files, my entire thesis. She looked down at the table. 2 years ago, he was the keynote speaker at the Global Linguistics Symposium in Geneva. A huge event. I was supposed to be there to present a small part of my research. He told me my panel was cut for time, but that he'd mention my work in his speech. He didn't, did he? Sarah said softly. Oh, he did, Nina said with a bitter laugh. He presented my entire thesis, my theory, my data, my recordings. He presented it all as his own. Sarah's pen stopped. My God. He'd been playing me for years, using his mentorship to bleed me dry of every original thought. He changed the title. He called it Ancestral Resonance Theory. It was a hit. He got a standing ovation. He was offered a 7-figure book deal and a new endowed chair at the university. And you? I was in the back row, watching. When I confronted him, he laughed at me. He told me I was a gifted researcher, but that I lacked the theoretical framework to make it mean anything. He said he had elevated my raw data. Then he threatened me. He said if I made a fuss, he'd have me blackballed. He said, who are they going to believe? Me or a hysterical, unpublished graduate student? And you just let him? What could I do? Nina cried, the tears she'd held back for 5 years finally coming. I went to the university review board. I showed them my drafts, my emails, and that's where he comes in. Croft, Sarah whispered. Nina nodded, wiping her face angrily. Alistair Croft. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was on the external review board for the linguistics department. He and Wade were old friends. He was the one who had peer-reviewed Wade's stolen research. He was the one who personally vouched for its authenticity. He knew, Sarah said, the pieces clicking into place. He knew, Nina confirmed. I had sent my initial proposal to that same board 2 years earlier. Croft himself had reviewed it. I found his notes in my file. He'd called my proposal promising, if underdeveloped. When I came forward, Croft was the first one to shut me down. He and Wade closed ranks. They published a joint paper, a rebuttal to my outrageous claims, dismissing me. They destroyed my credibility. They said I was unstable, a fringe researcher with a personal vendetta. I was dismissed from the doctoral program. I lost my funding. My career was over before it began. Wade became a legend, and Croft got to be the kingmaker. The two women sat in silence, the fluorescent lights humming above them. So tonight, Sarah finally said, her voice hard as steel. When you translated that letter, Alistair Croft didn't just see a smart waitress. He saw a ghost. The one person in the world who could prove he's not just a fraud, but a co-conspirator in one of the biggest academic thefts in the last century. He didn't recognize me, Nina said. That's the worst part. I've been serving him wine for 6 months. He's looked through me a dozen times. I'm so worthless to him, he didn't even recognize the woman whose life he ruined. Sarah Jenkins closed her notebook. She looked at Nina, and her face was a mask of cold, professional fury. He'll recognize you soon, she said. This isn't a story about a smart waitress. This is an expose, and we are going to burn them both to the ground. How? Nina asked, her voice small. It's my word against 2 of the biggest names in the world. They have names, Sarah said, a grim smile playing on her lips. But you have something they don't. What? The truth. And you still have your research, don't you? The original files, the hard drives, the emails. Nina met her gaze. I have everything. The next 2 days were a blur for Nina. She called in sick to the scriptorium, claiming a migraine. Mr. Henderson was furious, but she didn't care. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't Nina the waitress. She was Dr. Russo, and she was preparing for war. She met Sarah at the Atlantic's Midtown offices, a sleek, glass and steel monolith that hummed with quiet importance. They huddled in a small, soundproof conference room. Nina, on her old sputtering laptop, pulled up the evidence. It was all there. The original thesis, Phonetic Memory, with metadata time-stamped from 2020. The emails to Dr. Martin Wade, full of her excited discoveries. His replies, subtly suggesting she add data points that he would later steal. The audio files of the Genoese fishermen, their voices crackling with age, telling stories no one else had ever recorded. And then, the smoking gun, her initial doctoral proposal, and the official PDF of the review panel's feedback. There, in black and white, was the digital signature of Professor Alistair Croft, acknowledging his review of her promising, if underdeveloped, work. "This," Sarah said, tapping the screen, "is the kill shot. This proves he knew about your research before Wade published it. This proves he lied to the board." "It's not enough to just publish it," Nina said, her voice hardening. "He's a celebrity. He'll spin it. He'll say he forgot. He'll say it was a clerical error. He'll say I'm the one obsessed, that I'm the stalker. He'll paint me as the unstable woman they always said I was. He'll ruin me all over again." "You're right," Sarah said. "We can't just present the evidence. We have to let him condemn himself. We need him on the record. We need to, as you did in the restaurant, let him expose his own ignorance." "How?" "He'll never speak to me again. He's probably having his lawyers draft a restraining order right now." "Oh, he'll speak to you," Sarah said, her eyes glittering. "He's an egomaniac. And an egomaniac has one fatal flaw. He can't stand being misunderstood. He's not afraid of you, Nina. He's afraid of the story. He's afraid of Waitress humiliates Polyglot. He needs to control that narrative, and we're going to give him the chance." Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Croft's publicist. She put it on speaker. "Hi, Jessica. It's Sarah Jenkins. Yes, the dinner was lovely. Listen, I'm sure you're aware, there was a moment at the restaurant with the waitress. Professor Croft handled it with such grace. Yes, incredible grace. Well, my editor is fascinated. We're thinking of re-angling the piece, a local genius angle. The professor and the prodigy, a human interest story. We'd love to get the professor and the waitress, Nina, that's her name, in a room together. Let him discover her, you know? A feel-good story about his expertise and generosity." There was a pause. Nina held her breath. "Alistair feels terribly about the misunderstanding," the publicist purred. "He was so impressed with her. He's been saying he wants to help her. A joint interview? To mentor her?" "That's perfect. He's available tomorrow, 10 a.m., his office at the university." "We'd prefer neutral ground," Sarah countered. "Our offices." 10 a.m. "Done," the publicist said. Sarah hung up. Nina stared at her. He thinks he can spin this. He thinks he can paint me as his discovery, as his protege." "That's exactly what he thinks," Sarah said, packing up her bag. "He's walking right into the trap. He thinks he's coming to a photo op. He's actually coming to his own execution." "What am I supposed to do?" Nina asked, terrified again. "Tomorrow you're not a waitress. You're Dr. Russo, and you're not going to talk about Ligurian. You're not even going to talk about Wade." Sarah handed Nina a slim book. The title was Babel Unlocked by Alistair Croft. "I read his book last night," Sarah said. "It's thin. I want you to read it tonight. Read it like you're grading a failed exam. Find the mistakes, not the typos, the real mistakes, the ones that prove he's a fraud. Sarah, He's coming tomorrow to prove he's a genius. You're going to come to prove he's not. Now go get some sleep. You've got a busy day. Nina walked home, the book heavy in her bag. She didn't sleep. She sat in her tiny apartment, a red pen in her hand, and for the first time in 5 years, she let her brilliant, furious mind go to work. She wasn't just reading. She was dissecting. And by 5 a.m., the pages of Babel Unlocked were covered in a bloody red ink. The conference room at the Atlantic was bright and airy, with a sweeping view of the city. A small audio recorder sat in the middle of the large, polished table. Nina sat on one side, flanked by Sarah. She wore her best and only blouse. She was quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Professor Alistair Croft entered at 10:02 a.m., fashionably late. He was not alone. He had his publicist, Jessica, and a small, weasel-like man Nina assumed was his lawyer. "Sarah, darling, a pleasure," Croft boomed, all charm and toothpaste. He turned to Nina, and his smile became paternal, condescending. "And Nina, my dear, I am so glad we're doing this. That was a remarkable display the other night. Truly, you have a raw, natural talent." He sat down, radiating confidence. He was here to be the benevolent king, anointing a commoner. "Thank you, Professor," Nina said, her voice flat. "Let's get right to it," Sarah said, pressing record on the device. "Professor, you're known as the world's leading polyglot, a man who champions lost languages, which is why your work with Dr. Martin Wade is so celebrated." Croft preened. "Ah, Martin. Yes, a titan. His ancestral resonance theory was, I flatter myself to say, something I helped nurture, a brilliant mind." "Brilliant," Sarah agreed, sliding a single printed sheet of paper across the table. "So brilliant, in fact, that he appears to have developed it 2 years after Dr. Nina Russo submitted the exact same theory with the exact same data to a board you were on." The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. Croft's smile vanished. The lawyer leaned forward. The publicist stopped texting. I don't know what you're talking about," Croft said, his eyes flicking to the paper. It was the review sheet with his signature. "This is your signature, Professor?" Sarah asked. "On the review of Dr. Russo's proposal, phonetic memory." I review hundreds of papers," he blustered, his face reddening. "This is a clerical matter. It's absurd." "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Or is it that you and Dr. Wade saw a brilliant, unpublished female student and you stole her life's work, that you passed off her 7 years of research as his, and then, when she protested, you personally signed the letter that dismissed her as unstable?" "This is slander," the lawyer squeaked. "This interview is over." "Sit down," Nina said. It wasn't loud, but it had the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Everyone, including the lawyer, froze and looked at her. Nina leaned forward. She was no longer a waitress. She was a predator. "You don't remember me, do you, Alistair?" she said, using his first name. "I served you coffee. Black, 2 sugars. On 12 separate occasions. You looked through me every time. Just like you looked through my research. Just like you looked through that letter at the restaurant. Now, see here," Croft stammered. Your party trick with the letter." "It wasn't a trick. It was fluency," Nina said, her voice cutting. "Something you know very little about." She slid his book, Babel Unlocked, across the table. It was open, the pages bleeding red ink. "Let's talk about your work, shall we? Page 84, your chapter on Basque. You translate the folk rhyme. Our home is our church, a metaphor for family piety. Yes, Croft said, grasping for solid ground. It's a beautiful local idiom. It's a mistranslation, Nina cut him off. Etsea means the house. Eliza means the church. But in that specific dialect, Etsea de Eliza doesn't mean the house is the church. It's a statement of property. It means the house belongs to the church. It's not a poem about family. It's a serf's complaint about tithing. You turned a story of economic oppression into a Hallmark card. Croft was silent. Page 152, Nina continued, relentless, turning the page. Your brilliant analysis of Welsh verb structures. You claim the mutation of C to G is a sign of affection. It's not. It's a standard grammatical rule of aspiration that a first-year student would know. You didn't discover an idiom. You just didn't do your homework. This is academic debate, Croft sputtered, sweating now. Is it? Then let's debate this. Nina's voice was ice. Page 219. Your translation of the lost Sami Joik. You call it a mournful song of a lost reindeer. But the text you transcribed, you mistook the word goati for gakti. You thought he was singing about his tent. He was singing about his traditional clothes. But you didn't just mistranslate one word, Alistair. You mistranslated the entire phoneme set. The lost joik you discovered. It's not even Sami. It's a 1950s drinking song from northern Finland. You're not a polyglot, Professor. You're a karaoke singer. Croft was ashen. He was completely, utterly dismantled. You didn't just miss the nuance of the Ligurian letter, Nina said, leaning in. You didn't understand it at all. You're a performer. You collect catchphrases. You have no respect for the cultures, for the people, or for the truth. You and Wade, you're not academics. You're grave robbers. She finally leaned back. And I am the woman whose grave you tried to rob. But you failed, because I am Dr. Nina Russo, and I have all my receipts. Sarah Jenkins quietly pressed stop on the recorder. Get out, Sarah said to Croft and his team. The story runs tomorrow. We're running it with the full audio of this interview, and we've already sent the evidence packet to King's College London. Croft's publicist was crying. The lawyer was just staring, his mouth open. Alistair Croft stood up. He looked at Nina, his eyes no longer charming or arrogant, but hollow, filled with a terrifying, bottomless hatred. He said nothing. He just turned, and for the first time, he looked like a small, old man. He walked out of the room. The story did not just break, it detonated. Sarah Jenkins's article, The Silent Genius and the Empty Professor, went live at 6:00 am. By 6:05 a.m., Nina, who was sitting with Sarah in the Atlantic's 24-hour newsroom, saw the active users count on the page surpass 10,000. By 7:00 a.m., it had crashed the server. It was the audio file, embedded in the article, that acted as the accelerant. The world didn't just read about the confrontation. They heard it. They heard Nina's calm, surgical precision. They heard her voice, imbued with the authority of absolute, unshakable truth, as she said, "You turned a story of economic oppression into a Hallmark card." And most damningly, they heard Alistair Croft stammering, his bluster, his paper-thin defense crumbling into silence. By 9:00 a.m., Märschadlau Croft cancelled was the #1 trend on the planet. But it was the second trend that brought tears to Nina's eyes. Russo. It was started by a graduate student in Berlin, but it spread like wildfire. Thousands of students, postdocs and junior researchers began sharing their own stories of having their work absorbed by senior faculty, of being told to stay silent, of being dismissed as unstable or difficult for defending their own ideas. Nina hadn't just exposed a fraud, she had given an entire generation a voice. The karma, the hard karma, was not a slow-moving wave. It was a tsunami. For Alistair Croft, the fall was instantaneous. His publicist, Jessica, had quit via text message before the article even went public. His attempt at damage control was a disaster. He released a grainy, self-shot video from what looked like his study. He did not apologize. Instead, he blamed the current climate of outrage and a deeply unfortunate clerical misunderstanding. He referred to Nina as the young woman and condescendingly offered to oversee her future work to ensure its academic rigor. The video was ratioed into oblivion. Within an hour, his publisher released a one-sentence statement. "We are indefinitely suspending the publication and distribution of all titles by Professor Alistair Croft, pending a full review of their factual inaccuracies." His primetime TV special was pulled, replaced by a rerun of a documentary about garden snails. He was disinvited from every conference. His name was quietly removed from the boards of 3 museums. The People's Polyglot had become a pariah. He had built an empire on a curated voice, and in the end, he was undone by a real one. Dr. Martin Wade's fate was quieter but more profound. King's College London, its ancient reputation stained by the most public academic fraud in its history, moved with brutal efficiency. The emergency board meeting was convened less than 8 hours after the article was published. The evidence, Nina's time-stamped proposal, the emails, Croft's own signed review, was irrefutable. Wade was fired, but the university knew that wasn't enough. In a move that stunned the academic world, they not only rescinded Wade's professorship, but publicly nullified his doctorate, citing a career built on systemic intellectual theft. In the same press release, they issued a formal, glowing apology to Dr. Nina Russo and announced the creation of a new multi-million-pound endowment in her name, the Dr. Nina Russo Fellowship for Ethical Linguistics. It would be dedicated to funding and protecting the work of new researchers in the field. Wade was last seen by a former colleague 6 months later, handing out flyers for a private language tutoring business. Even Mr. Henderson and the scriptorium were not spared. The New York Post ran a gleeful, full-page spread with the headline, "Boss to Genius, Shut Up and Serve." The story included an interview with Marco, the line cook, who happily detailed Henderson's panic and his order for Nina to beg for forgiveness. The elite clientele of the scriptorium, horrified at the bad press and their own cameo in the Atlantic as the fawning audience, vanished overnight. Student groups from NYU staged silent read-ins on the sidewalk, protesting the restaurant's treatment of Nina. Henderson's desperate attempt to put a "We support local genius" sign in the window was widely mocked. 2 months later, the first edition books were auctioned off to pay creditors, and the scriptorium closed its doors for good. For Nina, the change was overwhelming. Her quiet, invisible life was gone. At first, she was terrified, hiding in her apartment as the media requests flooded in. But then, the other emails arrived. An offer from Harvard to be a visiting scholar. A call from the editor-in-chief at Oxford University Press offering her a 2-book deal, her thesis and a memoir. But it was the email from the new Chancellor of King's College London that made her stop. It wasn't just an offer to return and complete her doctorate. It was an offer for a full, tenured professorship. They wanted her to chair the new fellowship committee. They were offering her a lab, a staff, and a blank check to continue her nonna's work on her own terms in the very halls where she had been silenced. She took the deal. 6 months later, Nina stood backstage, her heart hammering. She was not in a dim, hushed restaurant. She was at Columbia University, in the main auditorium, a grand, three-tiered hall, packed with over 2,000 people. She was the last-minute keynote speaker for the Global Linguistics Symposium, the same event where Martin Wade had stolen her life. In the front row, she saw Sarah Jenkins, who winked and held up her press pass. "And now," the announcer said, a voice that, as we all recently learned, we should have been listening to for a long time. "Please welcome the head of the Russo Fellowship at King's College, Dr. Nina Russo." The applause was not polite. It was a roar. It was thunder. It went on, a standing ovation that lasted for a full 2 minutes. Nina stood at the podium, tears welling in her eyes as she took in the sea of faces, the titans of her field, the students, the old professors who had once ignored her emails, all on their feet, all for her. She waited for the sound to die down, her hands steady on the podium. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong, amplified to every corner of the vast hall. "My grandmother, who was a fisherman's daughter from Sestri Ponente, had a saying." She leaned into the microphone. She smiled, watching the professional translators in the booths frantically flipping through their dictionaries. "It means, a single drop of water is better than a dead rat in your mouth." It's a saying about gratitude. It teaches you to be grateful for the smallest scraps, to be quiet, to be thankful for whatever little you're given, and to expect nothing more. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the room. For 5 years I lived on those scraps. I was silent. I was invisible. I was told my work was raw data, that I was unstable, that I lacked framework. What they meant was that I was a woman, I was young, and I was not them. "We are taught," she continued, her voice resonating with a new, hard-won power, "that academia is a meritocracy. But we know that is not always the true. It is a system that too often protects the powerful, the loud and the fraudulent. It is a system that runs on the silent, uncredited work of graduate students, of women, and of researchers of color. The Alistair Crofts and Martin Wades of the world can only exist if we agree to be silent." She took a deep breath. "My name is Dr. Nina Russo. My work is not a scrap. My voice is not invisible. And this is not a feel-good story about a waitress who got lucky. This is a reckoning. Today," she concluded, as a new wave of applause began to build, "I am not here to talk about drops of water. I am here to talk about the sea of our shared languages, the deep, complex, beautiful ocean of human voices, the voices of poets like Lorenzo, writing home from a dying ship, the voices of our grandmothers, whispering recipes and lullabies. These are the voices that matter. And I promise you, I am only just getting started." She looked at Sarah, who was beaming. Nina stepped back from the podium, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as the scholar who had finally and completely reclaimed her name. The thunderous applause that followed was not just for her speech, it was for her victory. The world is full of Alistair Crofts, people who build empires on bluster and arrogance, counting on the silence of those they step on. But it is also full of Ninas, quiet geniuses, hidden experts, people with profound truths waiting to be told. Nina Russo got her hard karma justice, not just by being right, but by having the courage to finally speak. She took back her name, her work, and her future, proving that a single, authentic voice can shatter the loudest fraud. What did you think of Nina's story? What part of her revenge was the most satisfying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement is what keeps our channel going. If you loved this story of drama, twists, and real-world karma. Please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story.